something that you could not even imagine. Imagine their representatives in Congress not having a vote on measures that ultimately affect them. Their small businesses, their health care, and imagine them not having any representative whatsoever in the Senate. Now, I mentioned some of these places like Alaska, the Dakotas, Wyoming, because all of these places were at some time territories. And we forget that so many states were in fact a territory. But the reason that they were territories were they were working out issues within themselves to eventually become a state. And the understanding is that they would eventually be a state. But for all of the off-island or off of the mainland, the overseas territories, that's something that we have come to believe just is not ever going to be the case. And we take that as how it should be. But that's not really what I think the founders of our Constitution intended. One of the things I found most telling about the status of the territories is how absolutely unaware individuals living in the United States are to this. So many times on the floor, this year we've been discussing in Washington the Voting Rights Act. And there have been questions that the Supreme Court had about the Voting Rights Act and wanted Congress to take up additional measures from the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Well, members forget that individuals, over 4 million people living outside of the United States, have absolutely no voting rights. And more often than not, it's a really interesting proposition when I'm on the floor with members. I make it a point to be on the floor when members are voting, to be standing next to a member and they're telling me, get your voting card out, you forgot to vote. And I say, you remember I don't vote. And they're like, oh my God, I keep forgetting that you don't vote. Or even more interesting, sitting next to a member and they're looking up at the board and they're like, what are we voting on? And I have to turn to them and say, you're voting on the House resolution so-and-so. It's a measure to do this, and you should vote yes. And they're like, okay, thank you. And one of the older members one time looked and said, the one who can vote don't know how to vote, and the one who can't vote is telling them how to vote. But that's how Virgin Islanders feel, and that's how many of the people in the territories feel. And I think that one of the things that people forget about, we think about just the right to vote and how important that is philosophically, constitutionally, but what we don't talk about is the economic effect of not having a right to vote, the profound effect that has on the economies of the territory. Many of you, of course, are aware of what was happening in Puerto Rico, the issue of their debt crisis. And people just took it to mean they were a corrupt territory, they were spending money unwisely, they had not, done the things that they were supposed to do, and they overreached and got themselves into debt. They're just, poor consumers. They have a bad credit score. They just, rang up their credit cards too far. But what most Americans fail to understand is that the structure of the territories inevitably lead to them being in economic crises, because we are not treated the same as the rest of the United States. So in the case of Puerto Rico, because they do not get the same percentages per capita as the rest of the United States for basic social services that many of you take for granted, supplemental insurance for your disabled, Medicare, Medicaid, the formulas are completely different for places in the territories. That means that their own internal governments, the local governments, have to take on that burden themselves. And that, of course, then leads to them having to be able to find mechanisms to pay for those services as well. You forget oftentimes that many of us, all of us, are overseas, which means that there's so many goods and services which we cannot produce because of the scale and size of how we are. And so you're having ships come in and they're bringing goods and the ships are leaving empty, which means that then there's an additional cost for the ships coming, for those cargo coming back and forth. These are things that the territories deal with on a regular basis that causes the cost of living, the economic indicators, to be much higher than it is in other places. And so what you find with Puerto Rico was, you give them access to credit, but you have not given them the revenues to be able to balance themselves. And when a territory finds itself in a place where they've got to provide basic services to many of their citizens, that they're going to take the credit. If you as an individual have mortgages to pay, you have healthcare needs and others, can you imagine a situation where your job is only paying you enough to pay your mortgage and your child gets sick? What are you going to do? You have no other form of payment except this credit card that you have that's an unlimited amount and your child's in the hospital. You're going to take that credit card out and you're going to take care of your child's needs. That's what Puerto Rico found itself in. And now the chickens have come home to roost for them in that respect. But that was a fundamental structural problem that the federal government created for them. And the Constitution says that Congress has the responsibility of the territories. And they are unwilling at this time to take on that responsibility. Many of you in your states have no notion what a cap on Medicaid means, because you don't have one. You have, if you have individuals who meet the requirements, the economic, the income requirements for Medicaid, they receive it. The Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico will only get money up to a certain point. And if you have individuals who meet the demands and meet the requirements necessary for Medicaid, and you don't have any money to do it, then the state will have to pay for those individuals. That has put Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and Northern Marianas in very economic precarious situations. And they have no vote on the floor to be able to advocate and advance bills and legislation to correct that for themselves. That's why voting becomes so important to us. They're not able to demand, 4.6 million people are not able to demand of the person that is running for president to make promises and exact demands from them that they're going to take care of them. Because once that person is in office, they don't care what happens fundamentally to the territories, because these people don't vote for them. So they have no obligation to them other than a moral rightness. And that's the thing that makes voting rights important. Another one I was talking with our local senators about was that we have problems with our retirement system right now. And I was explaining to them that Northern Marianas had the same issue that we had of an unfunded pension liability. This was several years ago. And the federal government did nothing. And what happened? Their retirement system collapsed. It just collapsed. And the federal government did not even blink. So now retirees from the Northern Marianas are just getting, pennies on the dollar to what they thought they were going to receive from their retirement system. And Washington goes on as if nothing happened. I represent the Virgin Islands, but I, like many people in the Caribbean, was raised on a different island. It's called Brooklyn. And my family always told me, my dad was a cop, and he used to always give me, kind of street credibility, trying to explain things to me. And he says, the greatest hustle you can make on somebody is to make them believe that they're getting over. That's what hustlers look for. They look for trying to explain a situation to you that you think you're getting something out of it, and you're hustling them. One of the hustles I think that was exacted on the territories was to allow us to keep our federal taxes. And I'll explain to you why I believe that was a great hustle by the federal government. Most states, state of California, Louisiana, receive between, and the states in the Northeast, receive between 30 and 45% of your state budget comes from federal supplements. 30 to 45% of your budget. The territories, as an average, receive 13% of their budget is federal dollars. With an income of individuals, an average income of a family of $30,000 a year, How much federal taxes do you think we're able to take in to make up that difference? Do you think it's 20% to put us at 33%? It's probably around, in terms of federal dollars, about 10% of what we would receive. So we've been hustled, in my estimation, by the federal government to make us believe that we're actually getting something to keep our federal dollars in the territories, because then that allows the federal government to say, no, 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 you get to keep your federal money, so we're not going to give you SSI, we're not going to give you Medicaid supplements, we're not going to give you those things because you get to keep your federal dollars. So you guys just figure out how to grow your own economies, and that money that you keep, you're able to rest on that, and that will make up the difference. That absolves them of the responsibility that was given to them by the Constitution to support the territories. And we thought in the beginning that we get to keep our federal money. That's gonna, we're getting over on the federal government. No, we're not. We got hustled by the federal government in that respect, in my opinion, because I don't think that the economic numbers pan out to us having received a benefit from it. So I'm saying all of that to say that, it's time to evolve. The territories, all places were territories in some respects until they would come to a place where they could become a state or have some status that allowed them full inclusion in the American experience. We take on the responsibility of Americans by being veterans, by doing the things that we're supposed to do. Most of the territories have enormous brain drain because our smartest and brightest come to the United States and become contributing members of the states. But we have not received the benefit of that. The benefit is the right to vote. Individuals like Neil Ware and others who are advocating for this, it's seminal that we come to a place where we eventually get full inclusion. Until the insular cases, which took place at the turn of the century, there was an expectation that all territories would eventually receive a state status. The insular cases, which in fact were written by the same person, incidentally, who wrote Plessy v. Ferguson, created a completely different system for the territories. Interestingly, people of color, for the most part, along with the Plessy v. Ferguson cases, separate but unequal case law. So next March, the Virgin Islands, it marks 100 years that they've become part of the United States, that they were purchased from Denmark to the US. But the history of the United States, of course, the relationship between the Virgin Islands and the United States predates that by an enormous amount. We've given individuals like Alexander Hamilton to the United States. We've given great leaders like Denmark Vesey to the United States, but we don't have the inclusion. And it's time that we come to that. And I think that part of our country that's rich with history and a legacy of contribution that dates to its founding means that we should have an open discussion now with all of our lawmakers about how we come to the point that there is some inclusion of the territories in what's happening. I'm really grateful for our own local legislature, our senators who have asked that this issue be brought before this body, because I think, and we've seen from elections, that it's the state legislatures which really raise the tide that lifts all boats in discussions of great issues in this country. And I'm hopeful that you all, taking this issue up, will be an echo chamber to Congress and to other legislators that this is a discussion which needs to take place. The Virgin Islands and other territories seek inclusion. We want the benefits, and we're happy to take the responsibilities as well. And that's not a ceremonial recognition, but it's a means of self-determination. It's a means of making individuals feel that they are whole beings as a part of this country. The right and ability to choose and determine the social and economic future of our respective islands, whether it be statehood, some greater form of self-governance, or independence. And I thank you all that you're going to take this up, and I think you're going to have some really very interesting facts from Neil Ware to support this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Let's move right now to Neil Ware.